Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Shiyu Zhuang, a PhD student from Tsinghua University. It is a great honor to be here to make a presentation. The topic of my presentation is relationship between water absorption and chloride ion penetration of blending cement concrete with various scms. The contents of this presentation are divided into 4 parts: background, experimental, results and discussion, and finally, conclusion. Well, let's move on the first part, background. Water absorption is one of the most important transport properties of concrete. Most aggressive ions penetrate into concrete through water absorption, leading to durability related damage and performance degradation. Both the water absorption and durabilities of concrete are highly associated with the characteristic of pore structure. Thus, in theories, water absorption can be regarded as a representative descriptor to effectively reflect the durabilities of concrete. Chloride ion penetration is one of the most significant durability indicators. The rapid chloride permeability test, such as the electrical conductance test, is one of the most commonly used test methods to provide an indication of resistance to chloride ion penetration of concrete, in which the permeability grades are just roughly divided and the comparison of the specific charge past values is invalid, causing great inconvenience and confusions on the evaluations of transport properties and durability. It provides a new idea whether a reliable estimation of chloride ion penetration can be achieved by water absorption. However, the relationship between water absorption and chloride penetration has not been fully studied. In this study, relationship between the water absorption measured by STMC 1585 and the chloride ion penetration measured by STMC 1202 of concrete with additions of various mineral admixtures such as the fly ash, slag, and silicon film at various water-to-binder ratios is investigated to comprehensively evaluate whether water absorption can provide a reliable estimation of chloride ion penetration. Well, let's move to the second part, experimental. Portland cement, fly ash, silicon film, ordinary ground granulate, blast furnace slag, and ultrafine ground granulate blast furnace slag are used in this study. Water absorption text is according to ASTM-C 1585, while the chloride ion permeability text is as per STM-C 1202. Well, let's move to the third part, results and discussion. Figure 1 shows the results of the steam-cured pan cement concrete and fly ash concrete. The initial water absorption rate of plain cement concrete steam-cured at 90 Celsius degrees is higher than 50 times 10 to the minus 3 mm per square root of the second, which corresponds to its high chloride ion penetration grade. The initial water absorption rate of plain cement concrete steam-cured at 16 Celsius degrees is approximately 25 times 10 to the minus 3 mm per square root of the second, which corresponds to its low chloride ion penetration grade. The initial water absorption rate of fly ash concrete steam-cured at 80 Celsius degrees is smaller than 20 times 10 to the minus 3 mm per square root of the second, which corresponds to its very low chloride ion penetration grade. The chloride iron penetration grade of fly ash concrete with various fly ash contents is the same, while the initial water absorption rate decreases with the increase of fly ash content. The transport properties and durabilities of concrete in the same chloride iron penetration grade can be further evaluated by comparing the initial water absorption rates. Figure 2 shows the results of the steam-cured pan cement concrete and ordinary slag concrete. The initial water absorption rates of plain cement concrete steam-cured at 60 Celsius degrees and ordinary slag concrete steam-cured at 80 Celsius degrees are between 20 times 10 to the minus 3 millimeter per square root of the second and 30 times 10 to the minus 3 millimeter per square root of the second, which corresponds to their low chloride iron penetration grade. The initial water absorption rates of the ordinary slag concrete decrease with the increase of ordinary slag content. It is worth noting that the effect of ordinary slag on the transport properties and durabilities of concrete cannot be reflected in the chloride iron penetration grade, but can be reflected in the initial water absorption rates. Figure 3 shows the results of the plain cement concrete and ultrafine slag concrete. The chloride iron permeability grades of plain cement concrete and ultrafine slag concrete at both 28 days and 60 days are all moderate. It can be seen that inconsistent with the results of the chloride iron permeability, there is not much difference in the initial water absorption rates between the plain cement concrete and ultrafine slag concrete, which are all between 13 and 14 times 10 to the minus 3 millimeter per square root of the second. And there is almost no difference in the initial water absorption of the concrete with various ultrafine slag content. It reflects that although the ultrafine slag has a much larger specific surface areas and thus higher activity than ordinary slag, it cannot further effectively refine the pole structure compared with the ordinary slag, especially with small content. On the basis of the above experiments, the water-to-binder ratio is further decreased. The initial water rates of plain cement concrete and ultrafine slag concrete at a water-to-binder ratio of 0.35 are close to each other, or between 13 and 14 times 10 to the minus 3 millimeter per square root of the second, which corresponds to the moderate chloride iron penetration grade. The initial water absorption rates of plain cement concrete and ultrafine slag concrete at a water-to-binder ratio of 0.25 are all close to each other, or less than 20 times 10 to the minus 3 millimeter per square root of the second, which corresponds to the very low chloride iron penetration grade. Figure 1 shows the results of the silicon film concrete. Regardless of whether the water-to-binder ratio is 0.35 or 0.25, or whether the contents of silicon film is 10% or 50%, the chloride iron permeability grade of silicon film concrete is very low. The initial water absorption rates of the silicon film concrete at the water-to-binder ratio of 0.35 are between 15 and 20 times 10 to the minus 3 millimeter per square root of the second, while the initial water absorption rates of silicon film concrete at the water-to-binder ratio of 0.25 are between 10 and 15 times 10 to the minus 3 millimeter per square root of the second. And finally, let's move to the conclusion. In this paper, it is found that the water absorption can provide a reliable estimations of chloride iron penetration. There is a good correspondence between the initial water absorption rates and the chloride iron penetration grade. The initial water absorption rates of more than 15, 14 to 13, 13 to 20, and less than 20 times 10 to the minus 3 millimeter per square root of the second may correspond to the chloride ion penetration grades of high, moderate, low, and very low respectively. The initial water absorption rate can further reflect the transport properties and durabilities of concrete in the sand chloride ion penetration grade, where the comparison of the specific charge past value is invalid. And that's all. Thank you very much for your attention.